Avi, thanks for your time. So talks for a deal have come close before, only to collapse. How hopeful should we be that these new challenges and negotiations can be overcome?
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, indeed, we've been to this place before, unfortunately, too many times, and it's a very valid question. However, it seems like that in compared to previous times, could be a little bit more cautiously optimistic. We are looking at some very significant changes, which basically are not necessarily directly involved with the Israeli-Hamas collision, but regional changes like what happened in Syria, the momentum of Turkey, and the expected change of power in the US with the new presidency of President Trump. All those components together, I think, give some different, I would say, elements to the whole equation that I hope, could result in the end of the day, some breakthrough in the context of the discussion over the hostages.
We're hearing that some of the sticking points in the current negotiations are the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. Both sides have control over something that the other side wants. But does one side have more bargaining power? Does one side have the upper hand in negotiations?
Well, look, I mean, it's very difficult to weigh something like that, as you could understand. Obviously, on the Israeli side, the major challenge is the fact that you've got 100 hostages that are being held by Hamas and by others in Gaza Strip. And every day that goes by, there is a very serious concern for the well-being of those people. It is estimated that many of them, unfortunately, are not alive. So this is something which obviously, to start with, is, of course, a major point of weakness when you look from the Israeli perspective. In the end of the day, I would say that both sides, as you say, have a pressure card, sort of speaking. It's kind of like, in a way, a little bit sort of like a race of blinking, who is going to blink first. But in the end of the day, we have to remember that from the Israeli perspective, we are looking at people that are being held. They have been kidnapped from their homes, civilians, and they are being held in a very terrible conditions to the best of our knowledge. So you can understand that it's a lot of pressure. Israeli public opinion puts a lot of pressure on the government, and rightly so, to bring those people back. Today, the Israeli Prime Minister openly called the government to rush and hurry and move on in order to bring those people back to Israel.
Yeah, you mentioned the political pressure that's on Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government to bring those hostages home, but are there any political motivations that you can see for stalling a ceasefire agreement from either side?
Well, each side has its own political calculation, including the Israeli government. Though the Israeli Prime Minister argued time and again that the Hamas is the one that is putting the obstacle, I would say that many Israelis have serious doubts in those statements, and for good reasons, because there have been reports and statements by Israeli senior officials, including those who are engaged in the negotiations, that basically argue that there were times that we were close to a sort of a deal, sort of speaking, but it was the Israeli government that in the last moment put an obstacle. The same applies as for Hamas in this tragic situation. However, I would say that when you look at Israeli government, at least we know for sure, because they say so, that there are some ministers that are coming from the more ultranational right-wing components of the government that are actually expressing an opposition to a deal, and actually argue that the deal should be done, but not at any cost. So in the end of the day, when you look from both sides, I would say you definitely can see the political fingerprints of the calculations of both sides. On Hamas side, you see there is an ongoing and apparently involving some sort of power struggle within different factors within Hamas regarding the whole term of such potential agreement with Israel. So in the end of the day, the whole thing goes back particularly, I would say, to two major players or factors. One is the inner political calculations on both sides, meaning Israeli government and Hamas. And the other thing, as I said in the beginning of this interview, when I was talking about the role of regional and international developments, that I think in the end of the day will and could and will play substantial role in, I hope, boosting process of a deal between the sides.
All right, Avi Melamed is a Middle East geopolitical intelligence analyst. We thank you for your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.